We somehow got through the 2020 college football season, and it was one for the ages. It wasn't a normal season, but I'm grateful we were able to have one in general. Today, I'm going to be sharing with you guys my top 10 quarterbacks from the 2020 college football season. But before we get to the list, make sure you hit that subscribe button and turn on those notifications if you're new to the channel. I'm going to be posting a lot of college football content all off season, so if you're a big college football fan, then this is definitely the channel for you. Before I get to my top 10, I wanted to include some honorable mentions because there were so many deserving players of being in the top 10. If it wasn't for two games, Matt Corral actually likely would have cracked the top 10. He was fantastic for Ole Miss last year as he completed 71% of his passes for over 3,300 yards. He also had 33 total touchdowns in only 10 games. The problem was the fact that he threw 14 interceptions. But the crazy thing is, he didn't really have an interception problem. 11 of those came in only 2 games. In his other 8 games on the season, he actually threw only 3 picks. Corral threw for at least 320 yards in 7 games and only threw an interception in 1 of those 7. He had 5 games with at least 3 touchdown passes, including a game in which he threw 6. Overall, he was very solid for Ole Miss. Brady White has been so good since coming to Memphis, and he continued that in 2020. He threw for 3,400 yards with 31 passing touchdowns and likely would have set Memphis records across the board had it been a full season. He threw for at least 280 yards in 7 of the team's 11 games, including a 500-yard performance in a win against UCF, in which he threw 6 passing touchdowns. He threw at least 3 touchdowns in 6 of the games, and 5 of them were for wins. Brady White put up great numbers and won games while at Memphis, and is going to go down as one of the greatest players in the history of the program. Carson Strong is probably a name you didn't hear too much about in 2020, which is a shame because he was fantastic for Nevada. The Wolfpack finished the season 7-2 and were one of the more underappreciated teams among Group of 5 teams. Their success was largely due to the play of sophomore quarterback Carson Strong. He was named the Mountain West Offensive Player of the Year. He led the conference in pass completions with 249, led the conference in completion percentage at 70.1%, led the conference in passing yards with 2,800, and led the conference with 27 passing touchdowns. He was also top 10 in the country among all quarterbacks in completions, completion percentage, and passing touchdowns. Strong is definitely a name to keep an eye on in 2021, along with the Nevada Wolfpack. Up next, we have Shane Buechel, who had a very good career at SMU after leaving Texas. In 10 games, he was top 10 in the country in completions with 242 and in passing yards with 3,095. His 23 passing touchdowns were the 3rd best in the conference, and his passing efficiency rating was the 2nd best. It was a really rough end to his season, and that's why he's only an honorable mention. SMU was 7-1 through November, and they were a top 25 team in the country. Then they lost back-to-back games, with Buechel throwing 3 picks in those games. However, he was excellent through the first 2 months, so that's why I got him as an honorable mention. My final honorable mention goes to Coastal Carolina quarterback Grayson Mccall, who was arguably the best freshman quarterback in the entire country. The past season for the Chanticleers, he completed 69% of his passes, a very nice number. He threw for just under 2,500 yards and had 26 passing touchdowns with only 3 interceptions. He was also widely used in the run game, rushing more than 100 times for nearly 600 yards with 7 rushing touchdowns. He wasn't the flashiest quarterback and likely won't be in the Heisman running next season, but he won games for Coastal Carolina and didn't make too many costly plays, which is really all you ask for out of your quarterback. Coming in at number 10 on this list is Sam Ehlinger, the legend himself. Though he couldn't get the Longhorns back to where he would have liked, he was pretty good for them in 2020. He threw for over 2,500 yards and had 26 passing touchdowns with only 5 interceptions. He also added 8 rushing touchdowns as well. After a rough start to the season, he helped Texas win 5 of their final 6 games. Though it was a loss, his best game of the season came against Oklahoma. He put the Longhorns on his back as he totaled 400 yards with 6 touchdowns. Over his final 6 games of the season, he had 13 total touchdowns and only 1 interception. It really is a shame he got injured in the final game of his Texas career, but what a career he had. Had this been a second half of the season award, he'd likely be a lot higher. However, Spencer Rattler comes in at number 9. He had a very rough start to his Oklahoma career as he lost 2 of his first 3 starts and threw 4 interceptions. But after that, he was one of the most productive quarterbacks in the country. He led the Big 12 in completion percentage at 67.5, led the conference with 3,031 passing yards, and he led the conference with 28 passing touchdowns. Once he settled into a groove, Oklahoma looked nearly impossible to beat. Had the season extended another few weeks, Rattler very well could have led the Sooners into the playoffs. Still, he lived up to expectations and is only going to get better moving forward. The only reason Dillon Gabriel isn't higher on this list is because UCF had a down season by their standards. Still, Dillon Gabriel put up some of the best numbers in the entire country. He was 5th in the nation with 248 completions, 5th in the country with 3,570 passing yards, and 4th in the country with 32 passing touchdowns. He threw for over 325 yards 7 different times and had 5 games with at least 4 touchdowns. However, losing 2 of his final 3 games against ranked opponents is what hurt his season. His numbers were still really good, but you gotta beat the top teams when you play them. However, the fact he finished top 5 in the top categories is still very impressive. Justin Fields comes in at number 7, and he would have been in the top 4 had he had a full season under his belt. He ended up playing 8 games thanks to the Big Ten title game and reaching the national championship. So he got more than half a season's worth of games in. He was named the Big Ten's Offensive Player of the Year and led in nearly every category. He was first in passing yards with 2,100, first with 22 passing touchdowns. His passing efficiency rating of 175.6 was the best in the conference and top 10 in the country. In addition, he had 400 yards on the ground and had 5 rushing touchdowns. He still would have been in the top 10 regardless, but his performance in the playoff game against Clemson is why I have him all the way up at number 7. He did struggle against Indiana and Northwestern and Alabama, but his 400 yard, 6 touchdown performance against Clemson was one of the best overall games I saw in college football all season. My Heisman favorite for the 2021 season, Sam Howell had yet another solid season for North Carolina in 2020. He led the ACC with 237 completions, 3,600 passing yards, and 30 passing touchdowns. He also finished in the top 6 in all of college football in passing yards and passing touchdowns. The crazy part about diving into his numbers on the season was the fact that he threw for more than 300 yards only 3 times. He had 6 games with at least 3 passing touchdowns, even though he finished 6th. Had it not been for some questionable early season losses, North Carolina would have been competing for the ACC title and could have potentially been in the playoff hunt. However, Sam Howell was still fantastic, and I expect him to be one of the top quarterbacks next season. Before I get to my top 5, if you could please take a second and give this video a thumbs up, I would greatly appreciate it. It helps share the video with more college football fans, and it only takes a second to do. For some reason, Desmond Ritter was disrespected in the Heisman voting, as he didn't even finish in the top 10. He was named the American Conference Offensive Player of the Year. He led Cincinnati to a New Year's Six game and nearly capped off an undefeated season. He threw 2,300 yards with 19 passing touchdowns. However, he was the best dual-threat quarterback in the nation as he rushed for 600 yards and had 12 rushing touchdowns. He also showed up in the biggest games of the season for Cincinnati. Against SMU when they were ranked, he had over 300 yards and 4 touchdowns. He had 5 touchdowns against a really good Memphis team. And against UCF, he had 400 yards and 4 touchdowns. Then, he had 400 yards and 2 touchdowns against Tulsa and had 200 yards and 2 touchdowns against Georgia. He could have declared for the NFL draft this offseason, but he decided to return to Cincinnati for 1 more year. Though he finished 2nd in Heisman voting, I actually have Trevor Lawrence as my number 4 quarterback on the season. He was named the ACC Offensive Player of the Year, along with the ACC Player of the Year. However, he didn't lead the ACC in any category aside from completion percentage. Now, that's largely due to the fact that he didn't play in 2 games. He was great, but I just think that there were 3 quarterbacks who overall had better seasons. He finished the year with 3,100 passing yards and 24 passing touchdowns, while adding 8 rushing touchdowns as well. He'll be the number 1 overall pick in the NFL draft and is the best quarterback prospect in the country, but in regards to the season he had, I have him at number 4. Before I get to my top 3, share with me in the comments down below your top 3 quarterbacks from the 2020 college football season. BYU's level of competition really hurt Zack Wilson in the Heisman voting due to him coming in 8th place. It also didn't help him that the Cougars lost to Coastal Carolina when they had a chance to take down a top team. Still, he was fantastic in 2020 for the Cougars. His 73.5 completion percentage was the 2nd best in the country. He was 3rd in passing yards with 3,700 and was 3rd in the country with 33 passing touchdowns. His 196.4 passing efficiency rating was the 2nd best in the country as well. Oh, he also added 10 rushing touchdowns as well. I don't care about the narrative that he didn't play anybody. He played a really good UCF team to close out the season, and he had 450 yards and 5 touchdowns against them, so I don't know what more you want out of him. It was a fantastic year for Wilson, who had one of the best seasons from a quarterback in BYU history, which is saying something considering the amazing quarterbacks they've had. It was pretty tough deciding between my top 2, but with how both these quarterbacks finished the season, it actually became a really easy choice. Kyle Trask comes in at number 2. His 301 completions were the 2nd most in the country. His 4,300 passing yards were also the 2nd most as well. He did lead the country though with 43 passing touchdowns. He likely would have been number 1, but he lost the final 3 games of the season. He did throw for nearly 500 yards against LSU, but Florida should not have lost that game under any circumstances. Now, he was good against Alabama in the SEC title game, but Florida still lost. And then, well, I don't even know where to begin with his performance against Oklahoma. That first quarter he had was one of the worst performances I've ever seen. However, taking those games out of the equation, Kyle Trask still had an amazing season for Florida. Coming in at number 1 is Mac Jones, who seems to have taken home every quarterback award imaginable over the last few weeks. Now, this is largely due to him playing 13 games, but Mac Jones led the country in pretty much every category you can. He was first in completions with 311, first in completion percentage at 77.4, first with 4,500 passing yards, first with 10.3 yards per play, and first in passing efficiency rating with 203.1. He was, however, second in the country with 41 passing touchdowns. What really helped his case was the fact that over his final 3 games, he was absolutely lights out. He threw for over 400 yards with 5 touchdowns against Florida in the SEC title game. Then, against Notre Dame in the semifinal, he threw for 300 yards with 4 touchdowns. Then, in the title game, he threw for nearly 500 yards with 5 touchdowns against Ohio State. Overall, Jones was fantastic for Alabama in 2020 and was one of the main reasons they took home a national championship. So, what are your guys' thoughts on my top 10? Were there players that were ranked too high or too low, or players not on the list that should have been there? Drop a comment down below and share with me your thoughts. If you haven't done so yet, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on those notifications so you never miss another video. If you're a college football fan, then this is definitely the place for you. As always, thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you all in my next video.